The wind screamed like a dying animal across the Dakota Territory plains, and Flynn Xavier knew with absolute certainty that if he did not find shelter within the next hour, he would freeze to death in his saddle. December of 1876 had brought one of the worst winter storms anyone could remember, and Flynn had been caught in it while making the 3-day ride from Deadwood back to his ranch, 15 miles south. The snow came down so thick he could barely see his horse's ears, and the temperature had dropped so fast his beard had turned to ice within minutes. He had wrapped his scarf around his face, pulled his hat down low, and kept his head bent against the brutal wind, trusting his horse to keep moving forward. That was when he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. A child crying. Flynn pulled his horse to a stop, straining to hear over the howling wind. There it was again, faint but unmistakable. He turned his horse toward the sound, squinting through the white wall of snow. After a moment, he made out a dark shape in the distance. A wagon, tilted at an odd angle, one wheel broken clean off. As he approached, he saw her. A woman in a dark coat struggling to unhitch a horse from the disabled wagon while 2 small children huddled together in the back, wrapped in blankets. The woman turned at the sound of his horse, and even through the snow, Flynn could see the fear in her eyes. "Madam, you cannot stay here," Flynn shouted over the wind. "This storm will kill you all before morning." The woman pushed snow-covered hair from her face. "Our wheel broke. I was trying to get the horse free so we could ride, but the harness is frozen." Flynn dismounted and moved to the wagon. His fingers were already numb, but he worked at the frozen leather straps. Up close, he could see the children better now. Twins, a boy and a girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, their faces pale with cold. "Where were you headed?" Flynn asked as he finally freed the horse. "We have family in Rapid City. We left Deadwood this morning. I thought we could make it before the storm hit." Her voice broke slightly. "I was wrong." Flynn looked at the horse, then at his own mount. Between the 2 animals they might make it, but not if they tried to reach Rapid City. That was hours away, even in good weather. "My ranch is about 3 miles northeast of here. We can make it if we ride now." He looked at her directly. "I am Flynn Xavier. I give you my word as a Christian man that you and your children will be safe." The woman hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Leela Harper. These are my children, Emma and Ethan." Flynn lifted the 2 children onto his horse, then helped Leela onto her wagon horse. The wind had grown even more vicious, and Flynn knew they were in a race against time. He mounted behind the twins, holding them secure with one arm while gripping the reins with the other. The ride to his ranch was the longest 3 miles of Flynn's life. The children whimpered against the cold, and he could feel them shivering violently. Leela rode beside them, bent low against her horse's neck. Flynn kept talking to the children, telling them stories about his horses, about the cattle, about anything to keep them conscious and alert. When the dark shape of his ranch house finally emerged through the snow, Flynn felt relief wash through him so powerfully he nearly wept. He had built the house himself 5 years ago when he first claimed this land. It was small but solid, constructed to withstand the harsh Dakota winters. He dismounted and pulled the children down, carrying them both toward the house while Leela slid from her horse. Flynn kicked open the door and brought them inside, setting them down near the cold fireplace. "I need to get the horses into the barn," he said to Leela. "Can you start a fire? Everything you need is right there." Leela nodded, already moving toward the fireplace with determined efficiency. Flynn went back out into the storm, leading both horses to the small barn behind the house. His own horse, Dakota, whickered gratefully as Flynn rubbed him down and threw a blanket over him. He did the same for Leela's horse, making sure both animals had hay and water before heading back to the house. The warmth hit him as soon as he opened the door. Leela had gotten a fire going, and the children were now sitting directly in front of it, still wrapped in their blankets but no longer shaking quite so violently. Leela was kneeling beside them, rubbing their hands and feet. "Good work with the fire," Flynn said, shaking snow from his coat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Thank you," Leela said quietly, not looking up from her children. "Thank you for saving us." Flynn moved to the kitchen area and filled a pot with water from the pump, setting it on the iron stove to heat. "I will make some coffee and warm some stew. You all need hot food." As he worked, Flynn studied his unexpected guests in the firelight. Leela Harper was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26. She had dark blonde hair that hung in damp waves past her shoulders, and her face, though lined with worry, was striking. The children were small for their age, both with their mother's coloring and large, solemn eyes. "How long have you been in Deadwood?" Flynn asked as he stirred the stew he had made 2 days before. 6 months, Leela replied. She had removed the children's wet boots and was now examining their feet for frostbite. "My husband died of pneumonia last spring. We came west because his brother said there was work in the mines. But when we arrived, we found out his brother had died in a mining accident 3 months earlier." "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Leela's voice was steady, but Flynn could hear the exhaustion beneath it. "I found work at a boarding house, cooking and cleaning. It was enough to get by, but the owner sold the property last week and the new owner did not want to keep me on." A woman at the boarding house said her sister in Rapid City needed help with her children. She said she would pay room and board plus a small wage. Flynn ladled stew into bowls and brought them over. The children fell on the food with desperate hunger, and Leela ate more slowly, but with obvious relief. "You can stay here until the storm passes," Flynn said. "I have only the 1 bedroom, but you and the children can take it. I will sleep out here by the fire." Leela looked up at him, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. "You are very kind, Mr. Xavier." "Flynn is fine, madam, and it is just human decency. No one should be left out in a storm like this." Outside, the wind continued to howl, rattling the windows and piling snow against the walls. Flynn poured coffee for himself and Leela, and they sat in silence for a while, watching the children slowly warm up and come back to life. "Mr. Flynn," the little girl, Emma, said suddenly. "Do you have any other people here?" "No, just me," Flynn replied. "Well, me and the horses and some cattle." "Are you a cowboy?" the boy Ethan asked, his eyes wide. Flynn smiled. "I suppose I am. I raise cattle and horses. Sometimes I help drive herds to market." "That is so exciting," Ethan breathed. "It can be," Flynn agreed, "but mostly it is a lot of hard work." Leela stood and gathered the empty bowls. "Let me wash these." "You do not need to do that," Flynn protested. "You saved our lives and gave us shelter. The least I can do is wash some dishes." Her tone was firm, and Flynn recognized the pride in it. She did not want to be just a burden. He nodded and let her work. The children moved closer to the fire, and Flynn brought them some extra blankets from a chest in the corner. Soon their eyes were drooping with exhaustion. "Come on, you two," Leela said softly. "Time for bed." Flynn showed them to his bedroom, a small room with a simple bed frame and a thick mattress stuffed with straw and wool. Leela tucked the children in, pulling the quilts up to their chins. Flynn watched from the doorway as she kissed each of their foreheads and whispered something he could not hear when she emerged, closing the door softly behind her. Her shoulders sagged slightly. "They have been through so much already. I keep trying to give them stability, but everything keeps falling apart." "You are doing your best," Flynn said. That is all anyone can do. Leela sank into one of the chairs by the fire, and Flynn noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she held them out to the warmth. I was so scared out there. I thought we were going to die. I kept thinking about what would happen to them if I froze, if they were left alone. But you did not freeze. You are all safe now. She looked up at him, and Flynn felt something shift in his chest at the gratitude and relief in her eyes. You are a good man, Flynn Xavier. He felt heat rise to his face and turned to add another log to the fire. Just doing what is right. They talked for a while longer as the storm continued to rage outside. Leela told him about her life before coming west, growing up in Ohio, meeting her husband at a church social when she was 18. He had been a carpenter, good with his hands, always dreaming of a better life out west. They had married quickly, and the twins had come a year later. When her husband got sick, it had happened so fast she barely had time to understand what was happening before he was gone. Flynn found himself talking too, more than he usually did. He told her about growing up in Texas, learning ranching from his father, and eventually heading north to the Dakota Territory when land opened up after the treaties. He had claimed this 160 acres and built everything himself. It was a hard life, lonely sometimes, but it was his. You have never married? Leela asked. No, madam, came close once back in Texas, but she decided she wanted a town lawyer instead of a rancher. He smiled to take the sting out of the memory. Probably worked out for the best. She would have hated it up here. I think any woman would be lucky to have a man like you, Leela said softly. Flynn met her eyes across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. He looked away first, suddenly aware of how intimate this moment felt, the two of them alone by the firelight while the storm raged outside. You should get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Tomorrow will be a long day once the storm breaks. Leela nodded and stood. Thank you again, Flynn, for everything. After she disappeared into the bedroom, Flynn made himself a bed on the floor near the fire using extra blankets and his saddle as a pillow. But sleep was slow to come. He kept thinking about Leela's face in the firelight, about the way she looked at her children with such fierce love, about the strength it must have taken to keep going after losing everything. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first full day, Flynn woke to find Leela already up and making breakfast. The children were still asleep, and she moved quietly around the kitchen area, finding what she needed with minimal fuss. You do not have to do that, Flynn said, sitting up and rubbing sleep from his eyes. I want to, she replied simply. You are giving us shelter. I need to contribute something. Flynn did not argue. He could see it was important to her dignity. Instead, he put on his boots and coat and went out to check on the animals. The snow was still falling heavily, and drifts had piled up to 3 feet in some places. He dug his way to the barn and spent an hour tending to the horses and the 4 milk cows he kept. When he returned to the house, carrying a pail of fresh milk, the children were awake and Leela had breakfast ready. They fell into an easy routine. Leela cooked and kept the house tidy. Flynn tended the animals and kept the fire going. The children played quietly, drawing pictures in the condensation on the windows and playing simple games with buttons Leela found in a sewing kit Flynn's mother had sent him years ago. In the afternoon, Flynn showed Ethan how to carve a small horse from a piece of wood he had been saving, while Emma watched with fascination. Leela sat nearby, mending a tear in one of the children's shirts, and occasionally Flynn would look up to find her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. That evening, after the children were in bed, Flynn and Leela sat by the fire again. The wind had died down slightly, but the snow still fell steadily. Tell me more about your ranch, Leela said. What is it like in the spring? Flynn leaned back in his chair, remembering. The grass comes in so green it almost hurts your eyes. The creek that runs through the eastern pasture fills up with snowmelt and runs fast and cold. Wildflowers bloom all across the hills, yellow and purple and white. The cattle get fat on the new grass, and the horses run like they are half wild again. It sounds beautiful, Leela said softly. It is. It is the most beautiful place I have ever seen. He paused. Though it can be lonely sometimes, I can go weeks without seeing another soul. That must be hard. I am used to it, but I will admit it has been nice having people in the house. Hearing voices, laughter. It makes the place feel different somehow. Leela smiled. The children love it here. I have not seen Ethan so animated since before his father died, and Emma actually laughed today when you pretended that Button was a runaway calf. They are good children. You have raised them well. I try. Sometimes I worry it is not enough. They need more than just me. They need stability, a real home, a future. You are giving them all that, Flynn said firmly. You are doing everything you can. Am I? Leela's voice was troubled. I am dragging them around the territory, taking jobs wherever I can find them, living in boarding houses and spare rooms. What kind of life is that for children? A life with a mother who loves them and fights for them. That is worth more than you know. Leela looked at him for a long moment, and Flynn felt that shift in his chest again, stronger this time. He was starting to realize that what he felt for this woman was more than just concern for a stranger in need. On the second day, the storm intensified again. The wind came back with renewed fury, and the temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. Flynn kept the fire roaring and checked on the animals twice, fighting his way through waist-deep snow. Leela made bread, kneading the dough with practiced efficiency while the children helped by making tiny rolls with scraps of dough. The smell of baking bread filled the house, and Flynn found himself watching Leela work, noticing the way she moved, the way she smiled at her children, the way she hummed quietly to herself. Flynn, Emma said suddenly, when the storm is over, do we have to leave? The question hung in the air. Flynn looked at Leela, who had gone still, her hands frozen in the dough. Well, Flynn said carefully, your mother has a job waiting in Rapid City. But I like it here, Ethan chimed in. And so does Mama. Right, Mama? Leela's face had gone pink. Ethan, that is not appropriate. Mr. Xavier has his own life. We cannot just stay here forever. Why not? Emma asked with the pure logic of a child. There is plenty of room, and Mama is a good cook, and we can help with chores. Children enough, Leela said firmly. Go wash your hands. After they scurried off, Leela turned to Flynn, her face apologetic. I am sorry. They do not understand. Understand what? Flynn asked quietly. That this is your home, your life. We are just passing through. Flynn stood and moved closer to her. What if you did not have to be just passing through? Leela's eyes widened. Flynn, what are you saying? He took a breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff but unable to stop himself. I am saying that I have a ranch that needs help running it. I am saying that those children need a home. I am saying that I have not felt this way about anyone in a very long time, and I think maybe you feel something too. I am a widow, Leela whispered. My husband has been dead less than a year. People would talk. Let them talk. This is the frontier, Leela. People make their own rules out here. They make their own lives. He reached out and gently took her hand. Stay, not as a guest, not as a hired hand. Stay and build a life here with me. Tears spilled down Leela's cheeks. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are strong and brave and a good mother. I know you work hard and do not give up. I know that having you here has made me happier than I have been in years. He paused. And I know that if you get on that horse and ride to Rapid City when this storm ends, I am going to regret letting you go for the rest of my life." "I am scared," Leela admitted. "I am scared of making another mistake, of choosing wrong, of letting my children down. I cannot promise everything will be perfect, but I can promise I will work hard every day to give you and those children a good life. I can promise I will treat you with respect and kindness, and I can promise that what I feel for you is real." Leela looked up at him, searching his face. "I feel it too, since that first night by the fire. I have been trying not to, telling myself it is too soon, that I should not, but I do." Flynn cupped her face gently in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Then stay." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, we will stay." He kissed her then, softly and carefully, and Leela leaned into him with a small sound that was half sob, half laugh. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears. "The children were right," she said. "This already feels like home." That night, after the children were asleep, Flynn and Leela talked for hours, making plans. She would officially move into the ranch as his wife, though they agreed to wait a respectful amount of time before actually marrying. In the meantime, she would help run the household, and he would teach her about the ranch operations. The children would have space to run and play, and when spring came, they would start planning for the future. On the third day, the storm finally broke. Flynn woke to silence and bright light streaming through the windows. He looked outside to see the world transformed into a pristine white wonderland. The sky was crystalline blue, and the sun sparkled off the snow like diamonds. The children were ecstatic, rushing outside to play in the snow as soon as they had eaten breakfast. Flynn and Leela stood in the doorway watching them, and Flynn slipped his arm around her waist. She leaned into him, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I should ride to town," Flynn said. "Let people know you are safe. You must have had people worried about you." "The woman from the boarding house knew I was leaving for Rapid City. She will assume we made it before the storm." Leela paused. "But yes, you should let people know. And I should send word to the woman in Rapid City that I will not be taking that position. I will go tomorrow if the weather holds. For today, let us just enjoy this." They spent the day together as a family, and that was when Flynn truly began to understand what he had been missing all these years. Ethan followed him around like a shadow, asking endless questions about ranching and horses and cattle. Emma helped Leela with cooking and cleaning, but she also had a bold streak and insisted on helping Flynn carry wood for the fire, even though the logs were almost as big as she was. In the evening, Flynn taught the children a card game his father had taught him, and Leela laughed at their competitive spirits. Later, when the children were asleep, Flynn and Leela sat close together by the fire, her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I would feel this way again," Leela said quietly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just focus on the children and nothing else." "I am glad you were wrong," Flynn murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "So am I." "But Flynn, I need you to understand something. I did love Thomas. He was a good man, and I will always be grateful for the time we had together and for our children. I know that, and I would never ask you to forget him or pretend he did not exist. He will always be the children's father, and that is how it should be." Leela tilted her face up to look at him. "But what I feel for you is different, stronger maybe, or just different because I am different now. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Flynn kissed her properly then, deeper than before, and Leela responded with a passion that took his breath away. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Flynn saddled Dakota and prepared to ride to Deadwood. Before he left, he pulled Leela aside. "While I am gone, I want you to think about something." "What is that?" "I want you to think about what you want this to be. I meant what I said about marrying you, but I know you need time. I just need to know what you are comfortable with, what timeline feels right to you." Leela smiled and kissed him. "I will think about it. But Flynn, I already know that I want to be your wife. The question is just when, not if." Flynn rode to Deadwood with a heart lighter than it had been in years. When he reached the town, he went first to the boarding house where Leela had been staying and spoke to the proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Gunderson. "Mrs. Harper and her children are safe at my ranch," Flynn explained. "The storm caught them and I gave them shelter." Mrs. Gunderson's eyebrows rose. "I see. And when will she be returning to town?" "She will not be. She has agreed to stay on at my ranch permanently. We plan to marry in the spring." The eyebrows climbed higher. "Is that so? That seems rather sudden, Mr. Xavier." "Perhaps," Flynn said evenly. "But it is what we both want. I came to collect any belongings she might have left here and to settle her account." Mrs. Gunderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. I suppose there are worse fates than marrying a man with a good ranch and a solid reputation. Wait here." She returned with a small trunk containing Leela's few possessions and some clothes for the children. Flynn paid what she owed and secured the trunk to his saddle. He stopped by the general store next to pick up supplies, and word spread quickly. By the time he left the store, several townspeople had approached him with questions and barely concealed curiosity. Flynn answered politely but firmly, making it clear that his private life was his own business. The ride back to the ranch took most of the day, as he had to navigate through deep snow in places. When he finally arrived home, the sun was setting, painting the snow orange and pink. The house glowed with warm light from the windows, and Flynn could see movement inside. He brought the trunk in first, and the children cheered when they saw their familiar belongings. Leela's eyes filled with tears when she saw that Flynn had retrieved everything, including a small music box that had belonged to her mother. "Thank you," she said, holding the music box carefully. "I thought I had lost this forever." That night, after the children were in bed, Flynn showed Leela something he had been working on during the quiet hours while she slept. It was a small wooden toy, a horse on wheels that the children could pull on a string. "I thought Ethan might like it," Flynn said, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "And I can make one for Emma too, whatever she wants." Leela's hand flew to her mouth and fresh tears spilled over. "Flynn Xavier, you are going to make me cry all the time if you keep being this sweet." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "I just want to make you all happy. That is all I want." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt like it had always existed. Flynn taught Leela about the ranch, showing her how to care for the animals, how to read the weather, how to manage the land. She proved to be a quick learner with a natural affinity for the work. The children thrived in the open space and fresh air, growing stronger and more confident each day. Flynn found himself falling more deeply in love with all three of them. He loved the way Emma would grab his hand and pull him outside to show him some discovery she had made. He loved how Ethan would sit beside him in the evenings, carefully trying to mimic the way Flynn carved wood. And he loved the way Leela would smile at him across the room, a smile that was just for him, full of warmth and promise. In late January, a week before the month ended, Flynn rode into his yard one evening to find Leela waiting for him on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. "The children are asleep," she said quietly. "I wanted to talk to you." Flynn's heart jumped. "Is something wrong?" "No, everything is right. That is what I wanted to talk about." She took his hand and led him inside to the fire. "Flynn, I have been thinking about what you said. About timing, about when we should marry. And I do not want to wait until spring. I know it has not been a full year since Thomas died, and I know people will talk, but I do not care anymore. I love you and I want to be your wife. I want to make this official." Flynn felt joy surge through him so powerfully he had to blink back tears. "Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude and happiness into it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I will ride to town tomorrow and speak to the minister," Flynn said. "We can be married as soon as he can arrange it." "There is one more thing," Leela said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "The children. They have been asking about calling you Pa." "I told them to wait, but if we are going to be married, I think it would be right. If you want that." Flynn had to clear his throat before he could speak. "I would be honored. Those children are already in my heart like they are my own." They were married on the first Saturday in February, in a simple ceremony in Deadwood with only a handful of witnesses. Leela wore a dress she had remade from one of her old ones, adding lace from a tablecloth Flynn's mother had sent him. The children stood beside them, holding hands and grinning widely. The minister, an elderly man named Reverend Crawford, gave them a kind smile. "I have heard some talk around town about the speed of this union, but having met you both, I believe this is a true match. God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes He brings people together in the most unexpected circumstances." After the ceremony, they had a small meal at the hotel restaurant. Emma and Ethan were on their best behavior, and Flynn felt like his heart might burst from happiness as he watched his new family around the table. When they returned to the ranch that evening, the children went straight to bed, exhausted from the excitement. Flynn and Leela stood together in the main room, suddenly shy with each other despite the weeks of growing intimacy. "Hello, husband," Leela said softly. "Hello, wife," Flynn replied, drawing her close. That night marked the beginning of their life as a true family. They moved Leela's things into Flynn's bedroom, and the children took over the small room together, thrilled to have a space that was really theirs. Winter gave way to early spring, and the ranch came alive exactly as Flynn had described. Leela was enchanted by the transformation, spending hours walking the property and learning every inch of it. The children ran wild through the greening grass, chasing butterflies and watching the cattle. Flynn began teaching Ethan and Emma to ride, starting them on the gentlest of his horses. Both children took to it naturally, and Flynn felt a deep satisfaction watching them grow into confident young riders. In April, Leela approached Flynn with news that made his heart soar. She was pregnant. They were going to have a baby. "Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face anxiously. "I know we have only been married a few months." Flynn swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing. "Happy, Leela, I am beyond happy. I am blessed." The children were equally excited about the prospect of a new brother or sister. Emma immediately began planning what games they would teach the baby, while Ethan gravely informed Flynn that he would help teach the baby to ride when it was old enough. As Leela's pregnancy progressed, Flynn found himself being even more protective than usual. He took over the heavier chores and insisted she rest whenever possible. Leela protested at first but eventually gave in, recognizing that it came from a place of love. They spent the warm summer evenings sitting on the porch together, Leela's hand resting on her growing belly while the children played in the yard. Flynn would talk about his plans for expanding the ranch, buying more cattle, maybe building on an extra room or two to the house. "We are going to need that extra space," Leela said with a smile. "Especially if this baby turns out to be as energetic as the twins." In November, just over a year after that fateful snowstorm, Leela went into labor. Flynn rode hard to town to fetch the doctor, a capable woman named Dr. Miriam Jennings, who had moved to Deadwood the previous spring. The birth was long and difficult, and Flynn paced outside the bedroom door while Emma and Ethan huddled together on the couch, holding hands anxiously. Finally, just after dawn, he heard the thin, angry cry of a newborn. "Doctor." Jennings emerged a moment later, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Xavier, and your wife is fine, though she needs rest." Flynn rushed into the room to find Leela propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Flynn, meet your son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the smallest person he had ever seen. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, his face scrunched up with displeasure at being born into the cold world. "He is perfect," Flynn whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his much larger finger, and Flynn felt something fundamental shift in his soul. "Can the twins come in?" Leela nodded, and Flynn went to get Emma and Ethan. They tiptoed into the room with wide eyes, staring at their new brother with wonder. "What are we going to name him?" Emma asked. Flynn looked at Leela and she smiled. They had discussed names but had not made a final decision. "I was thinking," Leela said quietly, "that we might name him Thomas Flynn Xavier, to honor both his father and his father." Flynn felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you certain?" "Yes. The children should know where they came from, and this baby should know he is part of two legacies." And so Thomas Flynn Xavier, called Tommy by everyone, came into the world and into their hearts. He was a good baby, happy and healthy, and watching Emma and Ethan with their little brother filled Flynn with a joy he had never imagined possible. The first years of their marriage flew by in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Leela proved to have a head for business, and together they made decisions that grew their holdings and their reputation. Emma and Ethan continued to thrive, becoming capable young ranch hands who could ride and rope almost as well as Flynn himself. Tommy grew into a boisterous toddler with his mother's blonde hair and his father's blue eyes. He followed his siblings everywhere, trying to keep up with their longer legs and louder voices. In the spring of 1880, Leela discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in October, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose. Sarah was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn, dark eyes that reminded Flynn of Leela when they first met. By then, Emma and Ethan were 10 years old, confident and capable beyond their years. They had never called Thomas their father after he died, but they spoke of him sometimes, sharing memories with Tommy and Sarah. Flynn never discouraged this. He wanted them to remember the man who had given them life, even as he worked every day to be the father they needed. Now, one evening, when Emma was helping Leela with dinner, and Ethan was showing Tommy how to braid rope, Ethan suddenly looked up at Flynn. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. Do you remember the day you found us in the storm? Every detail. Mama says it was God's providence that you came along when you did. Do you believe that?" Flynn considered the question carefully. "I believe that sometimes the worst situations can lead to the best outcomes. That storm could have killed you all, but instead it brought you into my life. So yes, I suppose I do believe it was meant to be." Ethan nodded, satisfied. "I am glad you found us. I do not remember much about my first father, but I know I love you and you are my pa in every way that matters." Flynn had to turn away for a moment to compose himself. When he looked back, Leela was watching from across the room, tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. That night, after all the children were in bed, Flynn and Leela sat together on the porch as they often did. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and crisp with the promise of autumn. You ever regret it? Flynn asked suddenly. Staying here instead of going to Rapid City, taking a chance on a stranger, Leela laughed softly. Not for a single moment. Flynn, you gave us everything. A home, a family, a future. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. Why would I regret the best decision I ever made? Sometimes I still cannot believe it all happened, that I was in the right place at the right time to find you. It was not just right place, right time. You made a choice to stop and help. You made a choice to open your home and your heart. Another man might have ridden past, telling himself you were not his problem. Flynn pulled her closer. I am glad I am not another man. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Leela said, I want to tell you something I have never told anyone. What is it? That day when our wagon wheel broke, when I saw the storm coming and realized we were in terrible danger, I prayed. I prayed harder than I have ever prayed for anything. I asked God to send someone to help us, to save my children. And then, out of nowhere, there you were. I did not know that. I have been thanking God every day since for sending you to us, and for giving me the courage to stay when you asked. Flynn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Leela Xavier, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and those children, all of them. You have made my life mean something. You made it mean something, Flynn. You built all of this with your own 2 hands. I am just lucky enough to share it with you. He kissed her then, long and deep, under the stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Emma grew into a beautiful and capable young woman, skilled in both ranch work and household management. She had her mother's determination and her father Flynn's steady nature. Ethan became a natural horseman and cattleman, with plans to expand their operation further north. Tommy and Sarah grew up knowing nothing but the love and stability of the ranch. They had heard the story of how their family came together, told and retold on winter evenings by the fire. To them, it was a romantic tale, a story of fate and love and second chances. In the summer of 1886, when Emma was 16 and Ethan had just turned 16 as well, a man came to the ranch. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, and introduced himself as James Harper, brother to Thomas Harper. Flynn and Leela invited him in, though both felt a surge of anxiety. They had never told the children much about Thomas's family beyond the brother who had died in the mining accident. I apologize for arriving unannounced, James said, accepting a cup of coffee. I have been searching for you for some time, Mrs. Harper, or I suppose it is Mrs. Xavier now. It is, Leela said carefully. What can we do for you, Mr. Harper? I wanted to meet my brother's children, and to apologize. You see, I did not die in that mining accident. I was badly injured and spent months recovering. By the time I was well enough to inquire after you, I was told you had left Deadwood. I have been trying to track you down ever since. Ethan and Emma exchanged glances. Flynn reached over and took Leela's hand, offering silent support. My brother left a small inheritance, James continued. Not much, but something. It should go to his children. I also wanted them to know about their father if they are interested. He was a good man, my brother. He deserved to be remembered. Leela's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Yes, the children would like to know about him. And thank you for thinking of them. James stayed for dinner and spent the evening telling Emma and Ethan stories about their biological father. He talked about Thomas's love of woodworking, his terrible singing voice, his kind heart. The children listened with fascination, and Flynn found himself grateful that they were getting this piece of their history. Before James left the next morning, he pulled Flynn aside. I can see my brother's children are well cared for. You are a good man, Mr. Xavier. Thomas would have been grateful to know his family ended up in such capable hands. "I am grateful to have them," Flynn replied simply. After James left, Emma came to find Flynn in the barn. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Hearing about Thomas, about my first father, it was nice. But it did not change anything. You are my father in every way that counts. I hope you know that." Flynn pulled her into a hug. "I know that, sweetheart. And I hope you know that learning about where you came from does not change how much I love you." That evening, the whole family gathered on the expanded porch Flynn had built 2 years earlier. Leela sat with Sarah in her lap while Tommy practiced his rope tricks for everyone's entertainment. Emma and Ethan sat on the steps, talking quietly about their plans for the future. Flynn looked at his family, at the life they had built together, and felt overwhelming gratitude. A decade ago, he had been a lonely rancher facing a brutal storm. Now he had everything he had ever wanted and more. As if reading his thoughts, Leela caught his eye and smiled, that special smile that was just for him. The years that followed brought their own challenges and triumphs. There was the year a drought threatened their cattle, and they had to drive the herd to new grazing land. There was the year Tommy broke his arm falling from a horse and scared everyone half to death. There was Emma's wedding when she was 20 to a good man from a neighboring ranch, and the joy of becoming grandparents when she had her first child. Ethan took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself to be a worthy successor to Flynn's legacy. He married a teacher from Deadwood named Catherine, and they built a house on the northern section of the property. Tommy grew into a young man with a love for horses that surpassed even Flynn's. He started a breeding program that gained recognition throughout the territory, and eventually the state, when Dakota became 2 states in 1889. Sarah, their quiet youngest daughter, surprised everyone by developing a passion for education. She attended the Teachers' College in Rapid City and returned to start a small school on the ranch for the growing number of children in the area. Through it all, Flynn and Leela remained at the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love, tested and proven through years of hardship and joy, only grew stronger with time. On a cold December evening in 1896, 20 years after that fateful storm, Flynn and Leela sat together in their bedroom. Flynn was 60 years old now, his hair more gray than brown, but still strong and capable. Leela was 51, with lines around her eyes that came from laughter and sun, still beautiful in Flynn's eyes. "You know what day it is?" Leela asked, snuggling close to him. "How could I forget? 20 years ago today I found you and the twins in that storm. 20 years. It seems impossible that so much time has passed. But then I look at our grandchildren running around, and I realize just how much life we have lived." Flynn smiled. 5 grandchildren now, with Emma expecting her 3rd and Ethan's wife expecting their 2nd. And Tommy courting that nice girl from town. I suspect we will have a wedding before summer. And Sarah happy teaching. I used to worry about her, so quiet and serious, but she found her calling. Leela propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "We have been blessed, Flynn. So incredibly blessed. We made our own blessings, I think. We chose each other. We chose to build this life together." "I chose well," Leela said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I chose very well indeed." The next morning, Flynn woke early as always and went out to tend to the animals. The December air was crisp and cold, reminding him of that long-ago storm. As he worked, Emma arrived with her children, followed shortly by Ethan and his family. "What is all this?" Flynn asked, confused. "Mother told us what today is," Emma said, smiling. "We wanted to celebrate. 20 years since our family truly began." They spent the day together, 3 generations gathered in the house that Flynn had built with his own hands. There was food and laughter and storytelling. The grandchildren begged to hear the story of the storm again, and Leela obliged, making it sound like an adventure story. And then, she told them, her eyes finding Flynn's across the room, through all that snow and wind we heard a horse. And there was your grandfather appearing out of nowhere like an angel. I was no angel, Flynn protested, just a man on a horse. You were our angel, Emma said firmly. You saved our lives, and changed them forever, Ethan added. Everything we have, everything we are, started with your choice to help that day. Flynn felt his throat tighten. You all changed my life just as much. I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to live. As the day wound down and the families prepared to head to their own homes, Tommy pulled Flynn aside. Pa, I wanted to tell you before I tell everyone else. I asked Julia to marry me. She said yes. Flynn embraced his son, his heart full. That is wonderful news, son. She is a fine woman. I hope I can be half the husband to her that you have been to Ma. Just love her, Tommy. Everything else will follow. After everyone left, Flynn and Leela stood together in the quiet house, looking at the mess that came with having a large family gathering. Leave it, Flynn said when Leela started to collect dishes. We will do it tomorrow. They went outside instead, standing on the porch as night fell. The sky was clear and cold, filled with stars. 20 years, Leela murmured. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like we have always been together. I prefer the second one, Flynn said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I like feeling like you have always been mine. And you have always been mine, Leela agreed, leaning back against him. Through everything, every challenge, every joy, always mine. They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other in a storm and built a love that lasted through all seasons. Inside the house behind them were the physical reminders of their life together. The furniture Flynn had built, the quilts Leela had sewn, the photographs of their growing family. But the real proof of their love was not in things. It was in the ranch that thrived under their care. It was in the children and grandchildren who knew what true love looked like because they had watched it every day of their lives. It was in the community they had built, the lives they had touched, the legacy they were creating together. The wind picked up slightly, and Leela shivered. Flynn held her closer. Come on, he said. Let us go inside where it is warm. They turned together, moving in the easy synchronization of two people who had spent 20 years learning each other's rhythms. As they closed the door behind them, shutting out the cold night air, Flynn glanced back one more time at the starlit landscape. He thought about that younger version of himself, the lonely rancher who had been caught in a storm. He wanted to tell that man that everything was going to work out better than he could possibly imagine. That the snow and cold and fear would lead to warmth and love and family. But that man would find out soon enough, just as Flynn had. Some lessons could only be learned by living them. What are you thinking about? Leela asked, watching him with a gentle smile. How lucky I am. How blessed we are. We are not we? So very blessed. They went to bed that night as they had every night for 20 years, together in the room where their youngest children had been born, in the house that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to family. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance across the sky, watching over the ranch and all who lived there. In the years that followed, the family continued to grow and thrive. Tommy married his Julia and built a house on the western section of the property. Sarah eventually met and married a widower professor from the college, bringing him back to the ranch where he happily helped with her school. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren, each one adding to the rich tapestry of the Xavier family legacy. Flynn and Leela grew old together, their hair silver, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They took walks around the property every evening when weather permitted, Flynn pointing out changes and improvements, Leela commenting on the flowers and gardens she had planted over the decades. On Flynn's 75th birthday, the entire family gathered for a celebration. There were now 14 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren, along with all the spouses and partners. The house and yard were full of noise and life. Emma stood and raised her glass. To Pa and Mother, thank you for showing all of us what real love looks like. Thank you for building a family from nothing but faith and courage. Thank you for every sacrifice, every lesson, every moment of love. To Pa and Mother, everyone chorused, and Flynn had to wipe tears from his eyes. Later, sitting on the porch with Leela beside him, and most of his family scattered around the yard, Flynn reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a storm and a choice to help strangers. It had continued with another choice, to open his heart and take a chance on love. Every day since had been a series of choices. To work hard, to be kind, to put family first, to build something lasting. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Leela asked, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "Everything. Nothing. How much I love you." "After 51 years, I should hope so," she teased. 51 years since we married. But I think I fell in love with you that first night by the fire, when you were trying so hard to be strong for your children. And I fell in love with you when you carried my babies through that storm, talking to them so gently to keep them awake. I knew then you were a good man, the best I would ever meet. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family. Tommy was teaching his youngest son to throw a rope. Sarah was reading to a group of children under the big oak tree Flynn had planted the year they were married. Ethan and Emma were in deep conversation about ranch business, their spouses nearby. "We did well," Flynn said quietly. "Did we not? We did better than well. We did magnificently." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Flynn pulled Leela closer. She rested her head on his shoulder with a contented sigh. "I love you, Leela Xavier. I love you, Flynn Xavier. Today, tomorrow, and forever." The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had shone on a young cowboy and a desperate widow 20 years ago. But the people beneath them were no longer desperate or lonely. They were home, surrounded by love, living proof that the best things in life often come from the worst storms. Their story had begun with a snowstorm and a rescue. It had continued with love and faith and hard work. And it would end as all stories must, but not today. Today, there was only sunshine and family and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Flynn Xavier had set out on a routine trip to Deadwood in December of 1876. He had come home with a family and a future he had never dared imagine. And every single day since, he had thanked whatever Providence had put him on that road at that moment, allowing him to find the 3 people who would change his life forever, the twins who became his children, the widow who became his wife and the love of his life, the family that grew from one act of kindness on a frozen winter day. They never left his heart. From that first moment until his last breath, they were always there, the center of everything, the reason for everything, the best thing that ever happened to him. And he, in turn, never left theirs.